Information communication technology and national development. How far have we fared? How far have we developed in this sector? Have we done a lot to ensure that that aspect of the society which propels faster development is developed? That will be our focus this morning, and I have a stakeholder in that industry, Engineer Edmond Nkalo. He's former chairman, Nigerian Society of Engineers, Anambra State. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Anambra.
I also have Honorable Timothy Nwachukwu, who is Director, Youth Advocate for Peace and Justice Empowerment Network, YAPGEN, also with us this morning to look at this issue of ICT and national development. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Anambra.
All right, let me start with you, Engineer Edmond Nkalo. Over the years, we've seen developments happening in the ICT sector. What will be our assessment? Do you think we've actually gone far in that aspect?
Thank you very much, Anambra Dalun. I think it's a work in progress. It's a work in progress in Nigeria as a country, and it's even a work in progress in Africa. Because ICT is a continuum, it's a continuous development. It continues to develop every day. But more developed country has gone far ahead of African countries and developing countries vis-a-vis Nigerians and some other countries in West Africa. But I think we are trying to pick up now.
Okay. Why do you think we are far behind others when it comes to development of ICT in Nigeria?
Well, the reason why Nigeria seems to be lagging behind is lack of continuity by previous governments. You see a government that comes up with a policy that tends to promote ICT, and once the government exists, the next government comes with a different agenda instead of continuing with such policy. For example, during the President Olusegun Obasanjo's regime, we had the national digital policy. It was inculcated in Vision 2020, but he discovered that when he left office, President Yar'Adua came with 7-point agenda, quite different from him. And today we have a government that is talking about agriculture. So we will not have this continuity in government. A government comes, discards a policy that is existing. For example, there is a directive from the head of service in Nigeria that all agencies of the government, all MDAs, should give a preference to software made in Nigerian software in the past. But is it continuing today? You discover that a government comes in place and discards the policies of previous governments, and that is why Nigeria seems to be lagging behind.
If the problem is basically continuity in governance, that means it's something that goes beyond the ICT sector, because ordinarily governments fail to continue with the policies of the others. So how do we manage that risk in the ICT sector?
Well, for us to manage the risk, the leadership, because we're talking about national development. Of course, the private sector, the public sector must come together. We need first to appoint competent persons into those positions. For example, look at the last administration. Look at the last cabinet. You see somebody who studied law, for example, heading Ministry of Works, which our brother here who is an engineer, ought to be heading, for example. So that's the problem we have. We need to appoint, the government needs to appoint persons who are competent, who are versatile in that industry to be able to drive it. You cannot appoint. We had a minister of technology who was telling us that Nigeria will be producing pencil. I think he doesn't have that background. So the government should be able to, the leaders should be able to appoint.
So you think Adebe Achitu that headed communication?
I said information and technology.
Yes, but
of course he was a barrister. He was a barrister.
Yes. But when you look at ICT,
yes,
most industries are adopting it. Do you think it's still an exclusive preserve of a particular profession?
No. It's not. It's not. It cuts across several sectors. In fact, whether you're a private individual or a public person, if you want to make progress, you must. Of course, can you do without your mobile phone? Of course, it's a product of ICT.
Let me come to you. He talked about sustenance of policies. As an engineer, do you think that policies we've made so far in that aspect or that sector actually truly will sustain development in that aspect?
I agree partly what he said, but I don't seem to subscribe entirely to it's about government changing policy that is affecting what is happening in ICT in Africa, because generally Africa, technological-wise, is developing. And if you consider when we start having our first mobile phone by the then Nitel, called MTEL, in the 1993, moving into 2001 and 2003, when we now launched into GSM. Now, today you can see the growth. I think the last data they said about 3.6 million Nigerians has been keyed into another mobile registration. I think Nigeria is making some efforts. But I agree with him that we need to develop beyond just making call. We need to develop, because ICT cuts across every industry. It is there in healthcare. It is there in education. E-library is running. It is there even in the media. It is there in every aspect of our lifestyle. So talking about national economy, ICT is very, very important. That it is almost sine qua non that if you have a country that is not improving in ICT, that is a country that is heading towards poverty. So what we'll be talking about is how do we improve ICT? How do we get our youth to get more involved in ICT and owning the technology?
That's why I want us to look at the policies that have been made so far. He mentioned the National Digital Policy. We saw a transformation program under Goodluck Jonathan when Omobola Johnson, an ICT guru, was heading the ministry. And then this present government, they've also talked about it. There are national data that are meant to collate the data of everybody in Nigeria. We have the shift from ordinary paper to yellow cards for people who are moving. There are shifts already in ICT, in adopting the use of technology in communication and other aspects of. But do you think that the policies we've made so far are sustainable, that it can sustain the growth of the sector? Let me give you an example. In Nigeria, Southeast, we are still struggling with 3G and 4G, when some other people are already far ahead in 5G. It's affecting media, it's affecting different industries. How do we drive this growth? How do we ensure that we move from where we are to a better place?
It's not a policy issue. Nigerians is good. We have a very sound digital policy in this country. Even though it seems to be it has not been formally been dropped by the side. I think the major challenge is the drivers of these ministries. The Minister of Communication in this last administration, this last dispensation, is Adebayo Shitu. If you compare the age of the people who drive economy, and you compare the age of the immediate former minister, you can see where it's coming from. So even the background enough of the person who's supposed to be driving, we have a very big comma or full stop in what we are talking about. But I hope that if we have a dynamic young Nigerians to head such ministry, it will push ahead and make young people to know, because it is actually the young people that will drive this ICT. It's actually the use of these days that will drive this ICT. It's not just about talking about 3G, 4G, and even 5G. It's about even the coding. Even the coding. I was so impressed when I saw some young chaps in Nigeria talking about coding and trying to bring our young ones, very tender ones at the age of 9, 10, trying to code. Because the point is that ICT is the way to go. And we must key into it. Even down, not just about having a one ministry on it, say Ministry of Communication, every other ministry should key into it. The major is also boils down on procuring the right equipment. Because if you don't have the right facilities, you cannot move anywhere.
Let's look at that. You are coming from that industry, engineers. Basically, it falls within your purview, and then some other people who are making entries, like you said, making coding, programming, people who may not be trained engineers, but they have ICT inclinations. Now, let's look at what the Nigerian manpower has been able to develop. Do you think engineers, people who are investing in the ICT sector, have done enough that if Nigeria should reduce their dependence to the outside world in that sector, that what they fall back on can sustain us?
Nigerian engineers and Nigerian scientists are very good. If we shut down from the other parts of the world, because this is the whole idea of ICT is making the world a global village, like you hear them say. So we cannot just shut down from the.
Shut down like stopping connection.
Yes, I'm trying to make a point.
Okay.
I'm trying to make a point. We cannot shut down. We make sure that we liaise with them. But the engineers, the people that are working on ICT in Nigeria are good. We have the capability. We have the brains. We have the. It is about the infrastructure. It is about the power sector in Nigeria, for example. It is about the facilities that is supposed to be put in place by the state functionaries. If it's about human capacity, we have it. We will talk about Philip Emeagwali. He's a guru. He's even from Anambra State here. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. If you talk about personalities, we have the personalities. Even now, the softwares we use in engineering, the civil card, we produce the people who code the softwares are Nigerians. We have so many other Nigerians who are so good on it. What is important to us is that the state infrastructure should be put in place, especially power. Because if we don't have power, my brother, we are going nowhere. And I want to link this to the recent African trade zone that has just been signed by the president. I'm telling you honestly, that is a very big challenge to our leaders in this country. Because if our leaders in this country do not buckle up, Nigeria will become a dumping ground. Because Nigeria is up to about 190, 200 million people. Other countries that have about 9 million, 12 million. This is where they will sell their markets. Nigeria has the markets. Nigeria has human capacity, people who will buy in. So even in this ICT, we need to buckle up and start producing. Because if not, scientists from Togo, scientists from Ghana will start producing and they will continue to be a consuming nation. The government needs to make a deliberate attempt to train and retrain the engineers and the scientists so that they will continue to produce the required ICT for all our activities. I'm very happy with the state government that is trying to revalidate the civil service through ICT. I was also very impressed with what the governor did in people who are coming to work and clocking in. That is ICT. If that will be transferred to every other agencies and every other ministries, and probably train the local engineers, the local scientists who will be manning and maintaining these facilities, it will be a welcome development. That's the only way we will increase our capacity as a people.
Okay, you mentioned the issue of infrastructure, but you know that Nigeria basically practices what we call mixed economy, where the private sector and the public sector combine hands to come up with development plans. Do you think it's only the government that it falls within their purview to fix some of these infrastructure challenges that we have?
Well, of course, basically, it's not just the government. While I was speaking, just reflecting over the United States economy. For example, top 10 richest Nigerians have stake in oil sector, but in the U.S. it's not the same. You'll see people, of course, over there, they're more ICT driven. For example, Bill Gates, he didn't make his money through oil, and he made his money through ICT, and he's employing thousands and thousands of persons. So it's not something that the government do. The reason why I made reference to the government is all about the focus, it's all about policy, it's all about giving a direction. It's all about giving direction. So it's not something we are leaving for the government. For instance, let's look at the security challenges we're having in Nigeria and see how ICT can help us to solve the security challenges. And let's just oppose it with what we have have in Western nations. You see Nigerian soldiers most of the time that are bereft in information gathering. You discover that they are lacking in ICT. In the United States, for instance, they have their drones, which they use to monitor whatever that is going on, and then they have data, they have information. I tell you this, for example, if the Nigerian army has deployed has made the best use of ICT in this fight against insurgency, I'll tell you something that by now, Boko Haram could have been. I said, if they have maximized it, we have satellites. Nigeria have satellites. These satellites should be able to pick out these insurgents in Sambisa or wherever they are, and then transmit information to the authorities, and then the Air Force goes in there and degrade them permanently. So why that we are still having insurgencies? Because Nigeria is yet to maximize. Imagine if this Boko Haram is in the US. Do you think they are going to survive? They are not going to survive because they have ICT. Now, let's bring it down. Some time ago, the Federal Capital Territory, the federal government awarded contracts for installation of CCTV camera in Abuja and Lagos. What has become of it? For you to see why we're talking about the government, not just the private sector. CCTV camera is something that would have enabled even the security apparatus. But today, somebody can come into even Abuja, which is the capital of Nigeria, come in, steal, and go. The other time we saw what happened in Dubai, some young people went to rob in a Bureau de change, and of course, virtually all of them were rounded up later because of ICT. So in Nigeria, of course, the private sector have much to contribute to the development of this nation. But what we're talking about government is all about direction. It's all about focus. I remember that when Adeshina was the Minister of Agriculture, you see the way he used ICT to make the ones agriculture that most young people dread to go into. Most young people are not even interested. You see how young people are keen in going into agriculture because with ICT, you can actually get most of your job done. So the point I'm trying to make is that the private sector have a role to play, develop software, develop programs. For example, we have Taxify and the rest of them. If you want, taxi is no longer what it used to be. Before, if you want to go from one place to the other, you have to go and stand on the bus stop and wait. But now, from the comfort of your home, for instance, you can now book a taxi man. That is ICT at work. And book flight as well. You don't have to go and queue up. So the private sector have, of course, they are making impact. But then, why the focus is much on the government is because government have more money. Because if government can focus and said, okay, we are going to we're going to make sure that, let me make reference to the current commissioner for land, Bonaventure Namale. When the young man got in there, he said everything was a mess because most lines in Anambra State are not computerized. They're not on the system. You understand? And he said that is the first thing he's going to do to ensure that all lands are registered. You understand? So it cuts across every sector. Every sector. If you need data, do you know how many number of persons who are here in Anambra State? Do you know how many number of shops that are in Anambra State?
Okay, I'll stop you at that. Before we continue, when we come back from this short break, we'll look at finding you've already started discussing the solutions to this, but I want us to make concrete suggestions when we come back from this short break. Stay with us.
Anambra, Ekenemun.
Hi people, this is your favorite Igbolicious babe, Rachel Okonkwo, aka Calling One Cigar.
My name's John
I am Honorable Dr. P.T. Bida, member representing Indikoka 2 in Anambra State House of Assembly.
Afambo Nze Uche Nwora, Managing Director, CEO, Anambra Broadcasting Service.
My name is Colette Madike, beauty queen, filmmaker, and you're watching
Inekili
ABS TV.
Never you ever touch that dial.
Keep watching ABS. Alabama, we are like that.
It is ABS TV. All the time. ABS!
ABS, the heartbeat of the East.
right, we're still looking at ICT and national development. We've looked at challenges. We've looked at issues that might come up. We want to find specific solutions, but before we begin to go specifically, concrete solutions to those, I just want to ask this question to you, Engineer Nkalo. One of the challenges that most people have identified as a big challenge to adopting ICT in Nigeria is the high rate of poverty. People who have access to technology or internet are still on a larger side. Presently, the UNDP figure puts Nigerian poverty population at 98 million. The other time, the NCC man said that close to 30 million Nigerians have not used internet. That's a very significant number. How do we ensure that even the people at the grassroots have access to ICT and then also have education to use it? Till today, you still go to banks and you still see people who are seeking for help to use the ATM. So how do we get it right at that level?
Thank you very much. I think you just hit the nail on the head when you mentioned education. Because the baseline is education. The baseline is curriculum that is being implemented in our education system, namely from primary, secondary, junior secondary, senior secondary, and today we are running universal basic education. So it's about education. Give people education, you liberate them from poverty. Because the challenge we have is that we are uneducated. So we thank God with some states who are trying to improve in the education system. Recently, some governors are now saying we are granting free educations. If you look at in this country, you find out that the West seems to develop more than every other part of the country because of that initial step that was taken by Awolowo. Awolowo did something for the West, and the West are being, we are well educated at that point in time, and that is what is manifesting. I think if our people, if our government at all levels should concentrate and pay attention in education, that is when we will be able to say bye-bye to poverty. If we will continue to play around educational systems, if we don't have the right curriculum, then we're in trouble.
Okay, Engineer Nkalo, let me ask you this final question before we go. If you are made Minister for Communication in Nigeria now, what will be the first 3 steps you will take to fix that sector?
Beautiful. First of all, I will begin to value, I will try to show Nigerians that we have the capacity. Therefore, I will begin to show the Nigerians that have developed ICT and are using it locally. I will begin to showcase them. I will begin to drive a policy that will make us to use indigenous ICT that has been said, but I will make sure it is being implemented letter to letter. I will make sure that all the ministries and agencies and even schools are computerized, because if we don't have this free access to data, if we don't have free access to Wi-Fi, my brother, it becomes very difficult. Like we have actually pointed it out here that many Nigerians are poor. Then when you now begin to talk about adding extra cost of living by purchasing data, my brother, I don't know if the 30,000 naira minimum wage will be able to sort these issues out. If we should be able to make ICT data available in offices, in agencies, so that if you walk into an airport, for example, you have free access to data. If you go to schools, within the school hour, they should be able to provide free Wi-Fi to school so that the teachers and the students will be able to make use of this data. If we do that, that gives more people room to explore the internet and explore the world.
Okay, let me come to you. You're from the civil society sector, and in your portfolio here we have Director, Youth Advocate for Peace and Justice Empowerment. Our justice system still remains the most backward in the adoption of ICT in carrying out their functions. Let me ask you, going forward, what would your agency or what would your advocacy do to ensure that some of these sectors where we are not seeing adoption of ICT begin to adopt ICT? And then you also know that when he mentions issues that must be propelled, there are also issues about people who are benefiting from the old system who will fight back. As a civil society man, what will you do in that
Our
aspect?
work is to keep piling pressure, putting pressures on the various agencies, the various sectors that are in the position. For example, in the justice sector, we have what is called front loading. Before it wasn't like that. So we will put more pressure. We'll keep advocating, keep engaging the stakeholders, keep organizing seminars, making them to know the importance of ICT in promoting access to justice. And then you talked about the people who are benefiting from the old system. I think let's leave the people who are benefiting from the old system and then look at raising a new generation of young persons who would drive this ICT. He was talking about, I'm coming, he was talking about education. It's not just about education, but the right education. Some primary schools children, how many of them can operate computers? It's not about the paper-based certification. We're talking about ICT. I think the computer ICT should be taken down to primary schools, catch them young. Primary schools, secondary schools.
I want you to react to this in 30 seconds. You said raising a new generation. But if there is old generation that is benefiting from the old system, they will resist the raising of that new generation.
How would they resist it? They will resist it, but then remember that their own children too are part of that generation that will be raised. I think we shouldn't just use it as an excuse, but we should get every sector, get them involved. But most importantly, what they're afraid of is losing their job. Tell them, let them know the benefit. If they know the benefit, they can be trained. Of course, their own children will.
All right, thank you very much. Honorable Timothy Nwachukwu, he is the Director, Youth Advocate for Peace and Justice Empowerment Network, YABJAN, here with us discussing ICT and national development. I also have Engineer Edmond Nkalo, former chairman, Nigerian Society of Engineers, Anambra State, also with us, looking at as a technocrat and as a stakeholder in that sector. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Very much.
All right, that's how far we'll run this morning on Good Morning Anambra. Thank you for joining us. Make Nigeria, make your environment a better one for you and for people who live around you. I am David Obawasere, thanking you. Till Monday, let's see you again.